Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Your Spa Life show. Spa life is a lifestyle that accepts that accomplishment and harmony coexist. The spa and spa life, the SPA, is seek power always, that power within you that fuels you to do your bigger work in the world. I am so thrilled to introduce to you our special guest that we have today, Michael Neeley. He is definitely going to be in line in the spa life community, talking about podcasting of his own, talking about courage as a knight, and how he actually connects out with entrepreneurs. He is a mentor and business strategist for visionary solopreneurs. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Diane. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I love what you're doing with the show. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump in here because you are a formal professional actor and a medieval knight. And I love that so much because, I talk about my background as a former police officer. And, when you talk about jousting and being in the world and the fear experience and how you actually draw from that to do your work in the world, how has your jousting as being, a medieval knight, first of all, how'd that even come about? And how do you draw from that? Because I know you've had probably some fear situations where you've either been knocked off your horse or you've had somebody coming at you. How do you use that energy in your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. So to address the part of the question, how I even became a medieval knight, was I had finished my degree in acting and I was looking for work and not sure what was going to sprout up. And at that time, some friends told me about Medieval Times down in the Buena Park area, Southern California. And I went in and checked out the show and got them to hire me. And I started out as a squire and trained on the horses and swinging swords and eventually became a knight and the head knight and show manager of the show. And so I went around and opened different locations throughout the United States, hiring other guys to joust and sword fight, and then ultimately went on to do it for another 6 years at the New York Renaissance Fair. And yeah, it's choreographed, so you know what's coming at you, but you're also dealing with animals that have a mind of their own, and they don't necessarily think the way we do. And so there was always an inherent danger in what was happening, and I've had plenty of shares of accidents throughout that. But what's interesting for me now, the way that I apply it to my life is it's interesting, even at my live event not too far ago, I actually, talked about how I pierced through this veil of false beliefs that we have. And I use the analogy of using my sword like a knight. I'm going to pierce through this veil and reveal what is really happening for us and help people get beyond those mental blocks. So it's part of the work that I do, that I bring this knightliness, if you will, into it.
Right. Absolutely. I love that so much. And, while we're kind of still on the knightly, you actually appeared in one of my favorite movies, For Love of the Game with Kevin Costner. And, you were the cop on horseback in the movie there. And one of the things I love, and one of actually my favorite quotes from that movie is clear the mechanism. When he was pitching, and he would say that to clear out all the noise in the life. And so, we talk about, there's so many things happening in the world. You are a mindset mentor as well, where you're just really looking at, there's so many distractions that are happening for people and, the shiny objects that are taking people off their game. How is it that you clear the mechanism in your life, and how are you helping your clients do that as well?
At the risk of sounding trite in this, as I think about it, because it seems so simple, but one of the techniques that I use to clear the mechanism is called the Pomodoro technique. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. But
I am.
Okay. So I take a little timer and I set it for 25 minutes. And for those 25 minutes, I commit to focusing on one singular task. Right. And for me, that's like clearing the mechanism. It's like, okay, I know that during this time, while this timer's running, nothing else is going to get in the way and distract me. And so it allows me to get into the zone to do that work. Right. And of course, the reason the Pomodoro technique, I think, is effective, because if we tried to do that for hours on end, it could lead to burnout. But with doing it 25 minutes at a time and then a 5-minute break and then reinvigorate and start at it again and perhaps even a new task, I think that's super effective.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of times I talk to my clients about like resetting and I use like, the 20 minutes, the Pomodoro's 25, but I think there's a sweet spot somewhere between
Yeah.
20 and 30 minutes for people to be doing something. And what's so great about that tool is to actually set that timer, is to realize, during that time, are you actually completing what you set out to do, or did you get distracted even during the timer time, which allows us to have that awareness around what we're doing, and not from a punitive standpoint, but from just an awareness about how many things actually, did we check our phone? Did we check email? Did, whatever happened? And, to really hone that skill. And I think it's so important to have some of these, what some people would say would be a simple thing, but simple is not always easy, right? To be able to utilize something to have that completion. So I think that's a very valuable tool to be able to do that. I know too that you have, as part of your work, you're the founder of the Authority Academy. You're supporting heart-centered entrepreneurs and really having them step out into the world. How is it that you're really helping them, get on those bigger stages?
Well, one of the things that I teach the Authority Academy is about the 4 foundational pillars of authority, which in my book, the way I teach them is podcasting, virtual summits, speaking from stage, and authoring your own book. And when you combine those elements together in a particular pattern, even the way that you build them, it takes you from being the best kept secret to the go-to expert. And the way it does that is like podcasting, first of all, is a great way to get the exposure, out into the world. I mean, you know how it is having a podcast. Mine has been listened to in over 170 countries now, and that's exposure that I would not be able to get any other way. And beyond that, then what that has led to is it led me naturally into my virtual summit, which was a great way to also grow my network and build my tribe. And then beyond that, it naturally segued into speaking from stage, and getting the connections that I made actually allowed me to get invited to speak on other people's stages, till eventually I even did my own live events. And then all of this kind of feeds into a book that someone may want to write, or in my case, my book idea started before the podcast, and then everything kind of evolved to get the book done as well. So for me, those are the foundational pillars, and when used in a way synergistically, the power of it can be exponential.
Right. That is so great. And I know that, you don't even have just one podcast, right? You've got multiple podcasts, right? You've got Consciously Speaking, Buy This, Not That, and Something to Whine About, which is kind of fun. Actually, drinking wine versus whining, although there might be a little bit of both of that together.
Exactly.
So what is, and I know you're going to have a free gift, so stay tuned, listeners, at the end. He's going to have something for those of you who may be interested in podcasting, and how do you get started, and where do you go from that? Of all of those platforms, is there a certain, way that you start, as far as, starting a podcast first, or virtual summits, or, how do you weave those 4 different platforms together as far as where to begin?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that, Diane, because it really is, I think podcasting is where it starts. And the reason is multiple, but one of the big ones is that the ease of entry. It does not cost a lot of money to start a podcast. It doesn't require a lot of training or education in it to really get it. And I know people who started a podcast not even knowing subject matter necessarily. They just created 10 questions, and then they started interviewing people, asking those questions. So you don't even necessarily need to be an expert. And it's because of the ease of entry, it's a great way to start it out. And I also often refer to it as the Oprah effect. So when you look at someone who we all know who Oprah is, but she started out, she was a television host. And all she was doing was bringing people on and interviewing people. But every time she did this, the level of the guests would elevate over time until she could basically get anybody on her show. And so there's no reason you couldn't do that with the podcast as well. You start out and you grow it over time. And really, it's the first step, I think, in setting anything up because of the ease of entry.
Right. Right. Well, and, podcast is growing so much now, because now people can actually choose what they listen to. Are there any kind of tricks or tips that, for people who are considering podcasting, to differentiate themselves, as far as being a little bit more unique, or ways to just step out differently than the noise, kind of a step above the crowd?
Yeah, there are a few. And one of the big things I would caution people against is don't just jump into it and do it on your own, which quite honestly is the way when I first started consciously speaking over 4 years ago. The way I did it was I didn't even know what a podcast was. And then 14 days later, I had a show. And then I shut it down, though, when I actually, at one point during those first couple of months, I learned what a podcast could be. I shut my show down, I got a mentor, and I relaunched. And that's when things really started to grow. So I would say, first off, learn from somebody who's already doing it. Learn from one of the podcast coaches out there, because it'll help you to move along much more quickly and avoid a lot of the mistakes and the bumps in the road. Right. And so then beyond that, discoverability is the big issue in podcasting. Is how are you going to make sure that people find out about your show? Because like you said, it's growing in popularity and there are a lot of shows coming out every day. And so that is something that is really important to launch in a big way, know where the audience is and know how to find them. And the final piece I would say on this is that be prepared before you even start with some ideas of your longer term picture. And the reason this is so important is because statistically speaking, a stat that I heard not too long ago is that 93% of the podcasts that launch don't make it past 7 episodes.
Wow.
And there's a term in the industry called pod fading. And what I think happens is that people will launch a podcast thinking it's one thing, finding that it's not, and that it's not serving what they thought it was going to do. And so they didn't really even approach it in a realistic way. And then they just drop it. And so that's also one of the things that will happen if you don't have a good mentor supporting you in getting your podcast up there for the long haul.
Right. That's a really great thing to think about of that, big picture, because I'm just thinking as you're speaking, as far as just the evolution of my own show, I'm, going into, my 3rd year, and things, have evolved and shifted as I go. One of the things is I know is, wherever I go, there I am. Right. And so, really, drawing upon, my past experiences, things that I'm doing with my clients. But I think there is something about, also being evolutionary in your work too, because, we grow in our business and life as well, or so we hope, right? And to bring those things to the show. So, I had kind of an overarching theme about spa life and what that was, and just, really looking at the internal power that has, and really, that my guests have such different aspects that they bring into it as well. So I think that's helpful to bring those type of things in there. So what would you say was different in your relaunch from the beginning of when you started? What made that different, and how did that help you really excel in your podcasting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that you're kind of prompting me to think back on this, because it's not something that I've thought a lot about. But in hindsight, looking back, I know that when I first launched, again, not even knowing what a podcast was, a friend said, "Oh, you should start a podcast." And then 14 days later, I launched, and I had never listened to a podcast in my life. And so going into it, not knowing a lot of the stuff, I was releasing it very sporadically. I was not doing anything to grow an audience. I was just thinking, oh, this is like a fun little hobby. And then what happened is all of a sudden one episode just zipped up to, like, it was out in 500 downloads. I'm like, whoa, something sparked here. And that's what made me start to look deeper. And so what I learned is that you really need to be more consistent, because it's key. When your listeners do start to expect, it's like if you sit down with your popcorn to watch one of your favorite TV shows, and then all of a sudden, oh, we're not going to be on until 3 nights later, that kind of messes you up. And so in podcasting, you want to be consistent, and you want to think long term. And the other piece that I did is I went from a sporadic show once every 7 to 10 days to a 7-day-a-week show.
Wow.
And and
that's a huge commitment.
It was massive, and I was putting in 50 to 60 hours, but I decided to throw myself fully into it. And I also love that you mentioned, Diane, about how your show has evolved. And so as part of the evolution of Consciously Speaking, in season 2, I dropped back to 3 shows a week, and I found that my downloads didn't change. In other words, I was still getting the same number of downloads with fewer episodes. And when I reached out to the audience and tried to figure out what was going on, how is this possible? The feedback I got was that 7 shows a week, they weren't able to listen to all of them. It was too much content. And so they were picking and choosing. When I was only doing 3 episodes a week, they listened to all of them. And so my downloads stayed as high as they were. And that was super great feedback to learn. And so then as I evolved into season 3, I dropped it back to 1 episode a week and opened other shows as well. So it's really important to listen to your audience and the feedback you're getting and serve their needs too.
Right. Absolutely. Now, you talked about building community through podcasting. What are some of the ways that you're doing that? Because a lot of times I think people have the perception with podcasting is you are, either talking out to this audience, like almost like a one way, even in interviews, it's like, are there sometimes that wondering is like, are people actually listening to it and are they out there? And, what is the receptivity to the shows and those type of things? So how is it that you make it more of a two-way thing and you actually get the feedback from, not only your audience, but building community around your podcast?
I think it's super important to have a Facebook group where people who are a part of your podcast community can go to leave questions and post suggestions or even just add their own comments to the conversation and connect there. I think it's also important on your website to have a way for your community to reach out to you. And so through both of those, that's where I get most of the feedback about what's going on with my show and what they like, what they don't like. And so that helps me to formulate new shows moving forward. So I think that's one of the biggest ways. But also, the other piece that I'm also referring to about building a network is all of the guests that you bring in the show. So think about it as an opportunity. I mean, I've gotten to interview some really amazing people because I have this platform now. And so that network of friends and connections I've built has just been tremendous and something that I wouldn't trade for the world. So even whether or not the audience is paying as much attention as I would hope, I'm still building a great network of friends and the conversations that I get to have.
Right, right. No, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I felt has been so wonderful about when I go to live events is, people that I maybe wouldn't have had access to, or it's a different conversation, the type of things that help allow to have a platform to help promote other people. I mean, it's like, when you and I met, we were at a conscious event and having conversation around it, without either one of our podcasts, we maybe wouldn't have connected right away or had a way to have that happen. So, I definitely value what that is in the world and how we can reach, a larger number of people who need to hear the messages of entrepreneurs. Because there's one thing too, is as an entrepreneur, sometimes you feel like you're, by yourself in front of a computer and you don't have necessarily the office situation where it can be very isolating. And so this is a way, through podcasting to actually have entrepreneurs connect with other entrepreneurs, have some of the resources that they wouldn't necessarily have to build from that way. So thank you for being one of those pioneers in podcasting to have a place for entrepreneurs and you really look at the visionary ones. How is it that you chose to really support visionary solopreneurs in your work?
I think that evolved over time. I mean, when I first launched Consciously Speaking, my mission was simply to wake up the planet one person at a time. And so one of the goals to accomplish that was I decided to bring on people from all walks of conscious evolutionary thought. And so sometimes I would have somebody who is a Reiki master, and another time it might be someone who does Akashic Records readings. But I felt like by bringing this diversity, that people who were tuning in to listen to these shows, something would light a spark in them to help them wake up to the next level. Right. And as I started doing this, people were questioning me about like, well, how did you develop your show and how did you grow your audience so quickly? And I started answering more and more questions about, the podcast and the world that I was creating through using the 4 pillars of authority, that I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm definitely having this effect reaching out to the world, but what if I could help other visionary solopreneurs who also want to wake up the planet? And this is why I chose to work with that particular type of person, that I can help them to create their platform. So now it's like more pebbles into the pond, creating a bigger and bigger ripple effect.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that group of people as well, because then, I learned so much as I help teach people and mentor them. I learn so much from them as well. So I think it's a fun group to work with. So I appreciate that so much. Michael, one of the things that we look at here is, you'd mentioned as an entrepreneur, we get to design our life, but so many times people live by default and they get distracted. We talk about this whole distraction type thing that happens. And, so many of, listeners, the feedback I get is that, I have these great intentions and I set these boundaries, but, they constantly get crossed, or at the end of the day, it's like, I don't even know what I actually got done. How is it that you are consciously designing your day? I know you mentioned the Pomodoro as a technique and, as something you're utilizing, but, how is it that you're even deciding, what to even do that, really is moving you forward and, as you mentioned, moving the needle?
I love that question, because I think what a lot of people struggle with without even realizing it is that they're living a life by default as opposed to a life by design. And what happens is, if you don't make a determination of like, these are the goals, this is what I want to accomplish this week, or even if you set it as, instead of goals, as an intention, these are my intentions for today or this week or this month or this year, that if we don't set those intentions, then the world starts to set intentions for us. Things just start to happen. We get caught up in putting out this fire. We get caught up in dealing with this or someone else's drama or all of these other things. And it's because we left the space there for that to happen. But if we set up the design from the start. And so for me, part of that is the first thing I do in the morning is meditate for 5 minutes at least. And really just kind of figure out in that space of like, okay, here's my commitment to the day. This is what I'm up to. And I also think it's important to set up weekly goals, daily goals, monthly, whatever way you want to break down your goals, so that you can then review those. And that's part of the meditation that becomes a review process too, is like, what can I do today that will have the most impact and be the most effective? And I also do another little trick that I like to use that I think has been very helpful for me, is like, because so many of us will create a to-do list. I also create a to-don't list.
I love that.
And that is that don't check your email before noon, don't answer the phone, don't take it, whatever might work for you. What are the things that you want to be sure that you don't do today, or at least before a certain time, that can help you to stay more impactful in what you are doing? And so I think a to-don't list is real important too.
I love that. I think that's so powerful to have that, because, sometimes we just do the next thing or we move forward without having that overall picture of, is this actually moving me forward? One of the tools I love to use for myself and my clients is the brain dump, where it's like, because we have so many different things happening in our head, to just grab a piece of paper and just write out everything that's happening in your head. Then that gives you an opportunity to either cross some of those things up for that don't list, or circle the priority things that maybe got forgotten if you got sidetracked. But, some of these tools are just so helpful to make sure that we are actually moving forward and actually creating impact in the life that we're doing. So, speaking of which, this is great timing in doing this show. Happy New Year. It's always kind of that renewed energy moving into a new year. Do you have like an intention for this year? Do you have a word that you focus on that you're maybe using as a guiding, star for the year? How is it that you step into a new year?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I did a walk yesterday in a triple spiral labyrinth. And so I don't know if you're familiar with what those are, but super great way to meditate.
Share that with our audience so they can know.
Sure. So I'm not a master of it as far as like the history and so forth, but if you were to look up triple spiral labyrinth, you'll see images for it and so forth. And what it is it's a spiral path. And I believe this came from way back in Celtic origins. And you walk through it in a spiraling fashion. It takes you into the center of it, and then it's a walking path back out, which leads you to the next spiral center, and then back out, and then into the third one and back out, and then you do the reverse. And for me, it was a great meditation and a great way to kick off the new year, but also it really helps me to land on what is it that are my words for 2019. And the two big ones that struck home with me are inspire and teach. And so that is my goal in 2019, is to, really inspire more people to take action, to really get out there and get their message out to the world. And then the other piece of that is then teach them how. So that's my 2019.
Nice. I love that. I just had someone share with me about the labyrinth, and is that is a mirror of our mind and our journey. That, as we move through it, it's like, what blocks do we have? How do we make decisions? How are we moving through the world? So that's just wonderful. You got to have that experience and do that. So how fun to do that and to step into the world and having that happen. So, one of the things, before I forget, one of the things I love to ask my guests is that, environments are so important. You talked about being outside and inspirations that happen in nature. Everything in our life has a vibration, and it affects us in some way. And our physical space is definitely something that affects us. And so I always like to ask, some people have, their bedroom or their kitchen or their office, or there's a certain area that inspires them the most. What is your favorite room in your home and why?
That's interesting. I recently changed my bedroom, for starters. What I did is I took the television out of there and I cleared out. I used to have part of my office. This desk that I'm sitting at was in there. I mean, I got a really big bedroom. So, but I reclaimed the office space. I took the television out of there. So now my bedroom is really just a place to sleep, relax, meditate, recover. I do have a nice little meditation area and start of an altar in there. And it's so interesting, when I've been thinking about what's going on for me recently, I've been working at the dining room table. For some reason, it's just, I got great light coming in from outside there. I've got the beautiful trees to look out at, and it just feels open and spacious. And so I feel like there I can, really get my creative juices flowing and get more work done for some reason. I know it's weird. I've got this office right here, but I work at the dining room table.
I don't think it's weird at all. One of the things when I retired from law enforcement is I actually have an academy called From Clutter to Calm, about really consciously creating your space and really choosing what that looks like, because, where we are in the world and how our experience, which is why I always ask that question about our environments, because, this is also a great time at the beginning of the year to look at, what are we choosing? How are we consciously choosing our space? I actually had a client of mine that when we really had her walk room to room, and this is a good time of the year to do that, to walk in each room of your home, to look at, like, what do I want to experience in this room? What do I want to have happen here and be a reflection? Because a lot of the feedback I got was that people's offices were the least room that they wanted to spend time in. It was either the darkest room, there wasn't enough light, there was too much clutter in there were things happening. And so if you're building a business in the room that you like the least, what's the energy that's actually happening with that? And so one of the things that my client did was that she chose the master bedroom to redecorate her home to be the office, because she spent the most daylight hours in there. She had the most inspiration and things were happening. And she chose one of the smaller rooms, which maybe normally would have been an office, for kind of a cave-like experience for her sanctuary, for her bedroom, because she really just went in there to sleep and rest and meditate. And so it's kind of an interesting thing to look at, how do we default to the rooms that a contractor decided we were going to live our life in, versus consciously deciding the rooms that we were doing in. So it might be a fun exercise for you, me, and our listeners to kind of do that annual walk around our home and say, what do we want to experience in this space?
I love that idea. I think that's brilliant. And you got me thinking, maybe I want to shift this to be the bedroom and move the office into the master, where there's so much space.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking that for you. It's just like, what's possible. It's like, we think about, as we want to consciously evolve, sometimes we don't think of our own space because that's the way it used to be. I mean, I've been in my house for 20 years and, my living room, dining room area has actually changed 3 different times. I mean, I had a traditional space with a dining room table in the beginning, but then when my kids were in high school, it became a game room, right? Because that's where all the kids played and spent time. And then it turned into a meditation room. And I'm actually now going into this new year, I'm actually thinking about, now that, with kids and grandkids and the family expanding, I might make it more of a dining area again. So it's just like, how is my life evolving? How does my space evolve with me as part of that conscious path? So it made me think about that when you talked about it.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I mean, you're right. We are trapped in it the way the contractor built the home, and we decided this is a bedroom, this is a bathroom, this is a living space. Yeah, why are we stuck with that? So I love that.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to touch bases on each other and see
For sure.
what evolved out of that. So, well, I know that our time here is coming to a close. We could probably talk all day about all these wonderful topics and connecting with our people. And I know that they are definitely going to want to connect more deeply with you. And hopefully we got to put a bug in the ear of those thinking about podcasts, because I know that you have a free gift for those who are thinking about taking that path.
Yeah, I do. And it is called the Simple 5-Step Process to Launch a Rockin' Podcast in Just 14 Days. And it's really, it's the stuff that I wish I had known when I started my podcast. So it's a 17-page report, and you can get it for free. And hopefully this can put you on the right path to get your podcast up and running. So I'd love to make that available to your listeners.
Perfect. And what's your favorite podcast that you're hosting right now?
Oh my goodness, that's like picking a child, your favorite child. I enjoy all of them. I'm about to launch a fourth as well called Meditate on This, and which will be a meditation podcast. But I think, I consciously speaking, it's my firstborn, and so I think I would have to default to say that's my favorite little baby.
Nice. So perfect. Oh, I love that so much. Well, we will put all of that in the show notes so that people will be able to connect with you and be able to have that. I also have a free gift for our listeners as well, and that will be in the show notes as well, which is the Life Reset Quiz. It's a good time of the year, especially as we're talking about your space. If you go to liferesetquiz.com, it'll actually show you in just a couple minutes what things are working really well for you and what things you might need to look at a little bit differently. So we want to be able to utilize all of these tools to step into a larger expression for ourselves. So Michael, I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and connecting here with our audience.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Diane. I love what you're up to in the world. It's such a great honor to be connected with you, and I look forward to staying close in the coming year.
Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for taking your time. Without you, we wouldn't be here. This is the most precious commodity that we all have, the commodity. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here. And, whether or not you are watching this on Facebook or YouTube or on any of the podcast channels, please subscribe. That's how it gets out into the world, is to subscribe and to come back to connect with us and to put into the comments, what was something that you learned from Michael or for myself or our conversation? What's one thing that you're going to do differently? And make sure that you tag both of us in there so that we can respond to your questions and build that community that we've been talking about here. So as always, live your spa life, and we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.